Welcome back to Squawk Box this morning. A new report over the weekend shedding light on the first face-to-face encounter between Boeing CEO Dennis Muilenburg and F.A.A. Chief Stephen Dickson taking place last week in Washington. Joining us right now to discuss this is Seth Kaplan, principal at Kaplan Research. Good morning to you, Seth. Happy holidays. What a story it was. It really made you think, or at least made me think, that this plane may not be getting in the air anytime soon, and that the friction is real.
It is, and gosh, all of those projections over the months of, first obviously many months ago, then the end of the year, long after it was clear to everybody else that there was no way the plane could be recertified by the end of the year. But yeah, they in some ways seem as far away as ever, don't they? And, with the FAA telling, with Stephen Dickson telling Muilenburg no more artificial timelines, and we've learned now from that report, his predecessor, Elwell, was saying the same thing, even as Boeing was continuing to put out their artificial timelines.
Well, so the other question, you saw Gary Kelly from Southwest, on the record in that story, really going after the company.
Yeah, and that's a long-term issue for Boeing, even if Southwest never orders anything other than a Boeing. Because when Southwest procured airplanes for, basically its entire 50-year or so history until now, they never had any credibility if they suggested to Boeing that they were willing to look elsewhere, right? So on one hand, they got good volume discounts for being a great customer, but on the other hand, they really had no leverage. Whereas I think we all believe that Southwest really is willing to order something else. Its bias is to still order Boeing because of all the scale it has, but that's going to put downward pressure on pricing forever.
Right. So, Seth, here's the question I have, which is, look, I admire the stance that Dennis Muilenburg has taken, which is to say that he wants to see this out, meaning he wants to be in the seat. He thinks he's the right person to be in the seat until this plane gets in the air, and I get that. The question I have is a credibility one, and the idea of effectively changing pilots in midair, if you will, at this point, which is to say, if you're the board of Boeing, this credibility issue is real. It's not a not real issue because it's a real issue with the regulators. It's also a real issue with buyers and clients. And yet, if you change out pilots midair, does that make the situation better or worse?
So at what point, basically, would you rather see what's behind door number 3? Would you rather
This is the fundamental question, if you're the board of the company.
I think the starting point is that the board of a company's job is to increase the value of the company. And let me ask you this. What do you think happens if there's an announcement that Muilenburg is leaving? I mean, I think the shares at this point rise. Obviously, then the question is who's next? And would you want that job? But I think at some point, is he more a part of the problem than the solution? We know this is not all his fault. But not only the design issues, but the response has sort of been repeatedly botched from the early days. And I know it's been tough. And the Wall Street Journal story sort of confirmed what you could see, which is that he had lawyers pulling at him to say one thing. And
but Seth, I'm going to make it harder for you. You can't put Calhoun in the job because people will say it's the same problem, right? Because he's been there the whole time.
Right.
If you take whoever you think the number 2, 3, or 4 person is, I'm not sure that works either, because you're going to, again, this is a credibility thing, so you're going to bring somebody in effectively from the outside who's supposed to credentialize this whole process, and yet the outsider doesn't know all the ins and outs of what's been going on for the past year.
Right. No, exactly. And I think you call somebody like Richard Anderson, who's now running Amtrak, turning it around, and who previously turned around Delta, and who has all kinds of credibility in terms of now a safety turnaround at Amtrak, and who knows Stephen Dickson well. The problem is Boeing, you can only, there's a mandatory retirement age of 65, and he's 64 and a half. But, at least in some kind of a caretaker role, I think it's got to be somebody like that. You're right. That's the problem, is whoever has the institutional knowledge is somebody who's going to some degree, be perceived as part of the problem. I think it's somebody who can come up to speed quickly, but has that credibility with the FAA, because this is a long-term problem. The next aircraft certification process is going to be very different, and is going to cost many billions of dollars more, probably, because everything that's going on right now.
Seth, always great to get your perspective on all of this. Appreciate
Likewise.
it. Happy holidays if we don't see you before Christmas. You bet.